Burt Lancaster utterly hated Kirk Douglas. Now we know the reason why. And their toxic rivalry cost Hollywood over $100 million in today's money in sabotaged projects. Picture this. 1957, the set of Gunfight at the OK Corral. The camera stops rolling. Director John Sturges calls cut. Suddenly, Burt Lancaster grabs Kirk Douglas by his costume and slams him against a wall, his 6 feet 3 inches frame towering over Douglas. The crew freezes. Beat. "Say another word about my performance," Lancaster allegedly hissed, "and they'll need a new Wyatt Earp and a new Doc Holliday." Security pulled them apart, but something had shattered between Hollywood's two most bankable stars that would never be repaired. But was their legendary feud really about creative differences as the studio claimed? Or something far more personal, a betrayal involving a woman, an Oscar nomination, and a secret contract clause designed to humiliate? Breathe. If you're new here, now's the perfect time to hit subscribe, because the true story behind Lancaster and Douglas's explosive hatred has been buried in studio vaults for over 6 decades. Beat until now. Yaud. To understand why Burt Lancaster came to utterly despise Kirk Douglas, we need to pull back the curtain on one of Hollywood's most complex, troubled, and jaw-droppingly talented leading men. Burt Stephen Lancaster roared into existence on November 2, 1913, in East Harlem, New York. Born to a postal worker and a homemaker, young Burt grew up street tough in a neighborhood where survival wasn't guaranteed. His physical prowess emerged early. At 19, he stood 6 feet 3 inches with the chiseled physique that would later make him a screen icon. Beat, but it wasn't film that first captured his ambition. Before Hollywood, Lancaster was flying through the air with the greatest of ease, literally. After dropping out of New York University, where he'd attended on an athletic scholarship, Lancaster joined the K Brothers Circus as an acrobat. Can you imagine this future Oscar winner performing death-defying tricks without a net? This fearlessness, both physical and psychological, would define Lancaster's career and fuel his explosive hatred for anyone who challenged his dominance. MPH dominance. In the circus, Lancaster reportedly once said, "You learn that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. Everyone else is just waiting for you to fall." Beat, this deeply ingrained mistrust would later manifest in his paranoid reactions to Kirk Douglas's rising star. World War II interrupted Lancaster's circus career when he enlisted in the Army in 1942. Serving in the Fifth Army, he performed with the Special Services Division, entertaining troops across North Africa and Italy. The war showed Lancaster humanity's darkest capabilities, experiences that later informed his anti-war stance and his portrayal of military men with complex moral codes. But Lancaster's path to stardom was anything but conventional. His big break came by pure chance in 1945, when Broadway producer Hal Wallis spotted the 33-year-old Lancaster in an elevator. Struck by his powerful presence and rugged good looks, Wallis immediately offered him a screen test. Breathe. Just like that, the acrobat-turned-soldier became an actor. His film debut in 1946's The Killers was nothing short of explosive. Playing a doomed ex-boxer, Lancaster displayed a raw, animalistic magnetism that had audiences, particularly women, buzzing. Overnight, this complete novice became a sensation, commanding $150,000 per picture after just 3 films. Beat, the speed of his ascent was unprecedented, creating an arrogance that would later collide catastrophically with Douglas's equally meteoric rise. Are you starting to see how the stage was being set for one of Hollywood's most vicious feuds? Both men rocketing to fame from humble beginnings, both burning with insatiable ambition, both unwilling to play second fiddle to anyone. But Lancaster wasn't just a pretty face with impressive biceps. By 1948, he'd formed his own production company, Hecht Lancaster Productions, making him one of the first actors to seize control of his career from the studio system. This revolutionary move gave him unprecedented power to choose his roles, his directors, and most importantly, his co-stars. Beat power he would later wield as a weapon against Douglas. Lancaster's early filmography reads like a masterclass in range. From film noir, The Killers, to swashbucklers, The Crimson Pirate, to gritty dramas, From Here to Eternity. Critics were stunned by his versatility, and audiences were captivated by his intensity. Every Lancaster performance felt like watching a caged tiger, beautiful, powerful, and potentially lethal. His personal life, meanwhile, was equally dramatic. Married 3 times with 5 children, Lancaster's romantic entanglements became legendary in Hollywood. Beat. His first marriage to June Ernst lasted just 3 years. His second, to Norma Anderson, produced 5 children but collapsed under the weight of his numerous affairs. His final marriage to Susan Martin endured until his death, but not without turbulence. By the early 1950s, Lancaster had established himself as Hollywood royalty. His production company was generating hit after hit. His dramatic performances were earning critical acclaim. His distinctive smile, part warmth, part warning, had become his trademark. Beat, but there was a shadow creeping into Lancaster's kingdom, a rival whose own rapid rise threatened everything Lancaster had built. That shadow had a name: Kirk Douglas. What few people realize is that before their legendary rivalry exploded, Lancaster and Douglas had actually been friendly. When Douglas first arrived in Hollywood in 1946, Lancaster, already established, had reportedly offered advice and even introduced him to influential directors. It's this early mentorship that makes the hatred that followed all the more fascinating and devastating. The first cracks appeared in 1948 when both men were considered for the lead in Champion. Lancaster, busy with other projects, declined. Douglas seized the opportunity and delivered a performance that earned him his first Oscar nomination. Watching the acclaim heaped on Douglas for a role he could have played reportedly triggered something dark in Lancaster, the first seeds of resentment that would later bloom into hatred. By 1950, both men were commanding top salaries and headlining major pictures. But while they appeared to be equals, Lancaster harbored a growing obsession with establishing dominance. This manifested in bizarre behind-the-scenes power plays that today's Hollywood publicists would never allow to become public. Did you know that Lancaster reportedly had a height clause written into contracts when co-starring with Douglas? Beat It allegedly stipulated that Lancaster would always appear taller on screen, even if it required Douglas to stand in a shallow trench for certain scenes. This seemingly petty demand reveals the pathological competitiveness that drove their feud to such destructive heights. Lancaster's control issues extended beyond height. His production company gave him unprecedented authority over scripts, casting, and marketing. When he didn't have official control, he reportedly exerted it anyway, rewriting dialogue, challenging directors, and sometimes even reframing shots when editors weren't looking. This need for absolute control would prove combustible when combined with Douglas's equally strong artistic opinions. The 1950s saw Lancaster evolve from mere movie star to respected artist. His performance in From Here to Eternity, 1953, showcased a new depth and vulnerability. But even as his artistry grew, so did his reputation for being difficult, demanding, and sometimes downright tyrannical on set. Beat One director reportedly called him the most charming dictator in Hollywood. What's particularly fascinating about Lancaster is the contradiction between his on-screen persona and his private political views. While he often played all-American heroes and military men, Lancaster was secretly a liberal with left-leaning politics during the height of McCarthyism, a dangerous position in 1950s Hollywood. This ideological complexity adds another layer to his rivalry with Douglas, whose own politics were more centrist and accommodating to the studios. Blink, and you'll miss the Rita Hayworth connection here. The flame-haired star reportedly dated both men in the early 1950s, unknowingly passing between them intimate details about their insecurities and professional jealousies that would later fuel their mutual antagonism. Beat drop a comment if you caught that Easter egg. As Lancaster's star continued to rise, he became increasingly protective of his status. Friends and colleagues noted a growing paranoia. Lancaster reportedly kept a list of actors he considered threats to his position, with Douglas's name perpetually at the top, underlined in red. EMPH, in red. Are you Team Lancaster or Team Douglas? Type it in the comments now while we continue, because what happened next will force you to choose sides in Hollywood's most explosive rivalry. By 1956, Lancaster was at the height of his powers. He had commercial success, critical respect, creative control, and even sex symbol status despite being in his 40s. He had everything, except the ability to tolerate the one man whose career trajectory so closely mirrored his own. Beaten in 1957, their professional rivalry would transform into personal hatred when they were cast together in what should have been a dream project: Gunfight at the OK Corral. The stage was set for a showdown more dramatic than anything the script could provide. Two alpha males, two massive egos, two very different approaches to acting, forced to share not just scenes but equal billing. What could possibly go wrong? But beneath that million-dollar smile and iron physique, one name was carved in venom on Burt Lancaster's soul: Kirk Douglas. Incident number 1, the OK Corral explosion. 1957, Paramount Studios, Hollywood. Lancaster and Douglas were co-starring as Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday in Gunfight at the OK Corral. The tension had been building for weeks. Minor disagreements over blocking, passive-aggressive comments about acting choices, increasingly icy interactions between takes. The breaking point came during a pivotal scene where Earp and Holliday argue about their approach to justice. After Douglas improvised a line not in the script, allegedly a subtle dig at Lancaster's rigid acting style, Lancaster exploded, physically pinning Douglas against a wall. "You try to steal one more scene," Lancaster reportedly growled, "and I'll make sure it's your last." Director John Sturges was forced to shut down production for 3 days while producers negotiated a peace treaty between the stars. Beat, but the damage was done, and what began as professional rivalry had become personal. Incident number 2, the billing battle, 1958, pre-production phase of The Devil's Disciple. The two stars were set to reunite despite their previous clash. Both men's contracts specified equal billing, but the promotional nightmare began when they couldn't agree on whose name should appear first. The studio's solution was ingenious, but ultimately inflammatory. On half the posters, Lancaster's name would appear first, reading from left to right. On the other half, Douglas's name would appear higher, reading from top to bottom, creating a diagonal arrangement. At the premiere, Lancaster allegedly took one look at the marquee and stormed inside, refusing to pose for photos. Later that night, he reportedly told producer Harold Hecht, "Next time, just put his name in bigger letters and be done with it. At least then the betrayal would be honest." What should have been a clever compromise became yet another battle in their war of egos. Brief, but the personal attacks were just beginning. Incident number 3. The Academy Awards snubbed 1960 32nd Academy Awards ceremony. Lancaster was nominated for Best Actor for his role in Elmer Gantry, a transformative performance that showcased his range as a corrupt evangelist. Douglas, meanwhile, had been widely expected to receive a nomination for Spartacus, but was snubbed. When Lancaster won the Oscar, his acceptance speech thanked nearly everyone involved in the production, but also included what many interpreted as a dig at Douglas. "I'd like to thank those actors who make their co-stars look good, rather than constantly trying to steal the spotlight." The camera cut to Douglas in the audience, his trademark dimpled smile frozen in place. According to those seated nearby, he whispered to his wife, "He couldn't just win gracefully, could he? He had to put the knife in and twist it." What should have been Lancaster's crowning achievement became yet another battlefield in their private war. BEAE. But the most personal attack was yet to come. Incident number 4. The Ann Biden's incident, 1961. Romanoff's restaurant in Beverly Hills. Lancaster was dining with his wife when Kirk and Ann Douglas entered. According to multiple witnesses, Lancaster had previously been quite attentive to Ann at industry functions, perhaps too attentive. As the Douglas couple passed Lancaster's table, he allegedly rose, took Ann's hand, and kissed it with exaggerated gallantry before looking directly at Kirk and saying, "You always did have excellent taste, Kirk. Almost as good as mine." Douglas, normally quick with a retort, simply placed his hand on his wife's back and guided her to their table. But according to a waiter, once seated, Douglas's hand shook so badly he spilled his drink. Ann reportedly said, Ignore him, Kirk. Some men never outgrow the schoolyard. What began as a professional rivalry had now invaded their personal lives, crossing a boundary that could never be uncrossed. Beat. But the most publicly humiliating clash was still to come. Incident number 5, the 7 Days in May sabotage. 1964, Paramount Studios. Lancaster and Douglas were co-starring in the political thriller 7 Days in May, their final collaboration. By now, their mutual animosity was so well known that director John Frankenheimer scheduled their scenes to minimize their time together on set. During a pivotal confrontation scene, Douglas delivered an impassioned monologue about constitutional duty. When it was Lancaster's turn to respond, he allegedly turned slightly away from Douglas, a subtle but deliberate move that forced Douglas to speak to his profile rather than face-to-face. After several takes, Douglas exploded. "If you're going to act like a child, at least be man enough to admit it." To which Lancaster reportedly responded with cold precision, "I'm not acting at all, Kirk. I simply can't bear to look at you." Frankenheimer was forced to edit around the awkward blocking, and what should have been the film's most powerful scene became its weakest, a casualty of a feud that had transcended professional competition to become pathological. EMPH, pathological. To understand why Lancaster's hatred ran so deep, we need to briefly examine the man who triggered such visceral animosity. Born Isur Danielovich in 1916 to impoverished Russian Jewish immigrants, Kirk Douglas grew up in poverty in Amsterdam, New York. Working odd jobs from age 8, he fought his way to a college education, then to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, and finally to Broadway, a journey of relentless determination and self-reinvention. After serving in the Navy during World War II, Douglas made his film debut in 1946 as The Strange Love of Martha Ivers opposite Barbara Stanwyck. His breakthrough came in 1949 with Champion, where his portrayal of a ruthlessly ambitious boxer earned him his first Oscar nomination and established the template for his screen persona: intense, driven men with questionable ethics but undeniable charisma. What made Douglas particularly threatening to Lancaster was their similar trajectory but contrasting approach. While Lancaster maintained tight control through his production company, Douglas challenged the system from within, most notably breaking the Hollywood blacklist by openly hiring blacklisted screenwriter Dalton Trumbo for Spartacus. Beat. Where Lancaster was calculated, Douglas was impulsive. Where Lancaster was technically precise, Douglas was emotionally raw. Perhaps most importantly, Douglas possessed something Lancaster secretly envied: academic credibility. Despite his success, Lancaster remained sensitive about his lack of formal education and theatrical training. Douglas, with his dramatic arts background, represented everything Lancaster had skipped in his circus-to-stardom journey. Two men, so similar in their rise but fundamentally different in their approach, creating a perfect storm of rivalry that would never find resolution. The Lancaster-Douglas feud continued for decades, though it eventually cooled from active hatred to mutual avoidance. After 7 Days in May in 1964, they never worked together again, despite numerous opportunities that would have paired Hollywood's most bankable stars. By the 1970s, both men had evolved. Lancaster's later career included artistic triumphs like Atlantic City and Local Hero, while Douglas survived a helicopter crash in 1991 and a severe stroke in 1996, going on to become an acclaimed author and philanthropist. In a rare 1976 interview, Lancaster was asked about his relationship with Douglas. After a long pause, he reportedly said, "Kirk and I are too much alike in the wrong ways, and too different in the right ones. Some people bring out the best in each other. We brought out the beast." The most tragic dimension of this decades-long feud is what it cost both men and cinema itself. Beat the collaborations that never happened, the potential masterpieces sacrificed on the altar of ego and antagonism. According to film historian David Thompson, at least 7 major projects were abandoned specifically because they would have required Lancaster and Douglas to work together. In 1991, both men received the Kennedy Center honors in the same ceremony. Backstage, they were photographed shaking hands, their first public interaction in years. When asked if they had reconciled, Douglas allegedly smiled and said, "Some rivalries don't end. They just run out of ammunition." Burt Lancaster died in 1994 at age 80 after suffering a stroke. Kirk Douglas outlived him by 26 years, passing away in 2020 at the remarkable age of 103. In his autobiography, Douglas wrote only briefly about Lancaster, calling him a man of extraordinary talent and equally extraordinary demons. Perhaps the most poignant postscript came when Douglas was asked in a 2012 interview if he missed Lancaster. After a thoughtful silence, he reportedly said, "I miss the fights. Nobody fought with me like Burt, because nobody else cared that much." The Lancaster-Douglas feud reveals something timeless about male rivalry, professional jealousy, and the thin line between competition and hatred. Who was right in this epic Hollywood clash? Was Lancaster justified in his resentment of the man who so closely paralleled his own rise to fame? Or was Douglas the victim of Lancaster's insecurity and need for control? Type your thoughts in the comments below. Team Lancaster or Team Douglas, and tell us which of their 7 films together is your favorite. Beat our next video drops tomorrow, exploring another legendary Hollywood hatred that changed cinema forever. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss it. And remember, some details come from studio lore and remain unverified. Enjoy responsibly.